Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Soul and Story. First, live streaming to those who are able to tune in on the spur of the moment, and later for those who can catch up after the fact. I am clean historical romance author Sarah R. Turnquist, and I am getting ready to publish my 26th book in the next couple of weeks.
Yay.
That's so exciting. But I know that everybody's thinking, what does her shirt say?
What does it say?
It says, the book was better.
The book was better. And
usually that's the case.
Absolutely. Yeah. I would agree. Totally. Yeah. I'm Cindy Smith. I am just starting my writing journey. I love reading clean romance. I am a sucker for just all of those like time period romances, contemporary romances. Just give me a good old love story and I'm happy. Today, before we start our talk today, I do have a confession to make, Sarah. A couple weeks ago, we talked about the importance of making your bed, and I have a confession. I didn't make my bed yet today. I'm letting it air out this morning, but I just pulled all the sheets back and it's airing out. So after we're done,
I can't judge very much because, like I said in that episode, 9 times out of 10, maybe 29 times out of 30, even 99% of the time, my husband makes the bed while I'm doing my morning ablutions.
Yes. So I just thought I would be honest with our listeners. But today we're going to talk about.
That means so much to me, Cindy.
I want to be vulnerable. I'm being vulnerable. No, but today we're going to talk about the importance of reading books about the craft of writing. And this is a new concept for me because, I thought you just sat down and wrote a book. You watch TV or you watch movies and people just sit down and they start writing and there'll be this montage where there's like time elapses and they just sit at their computer or their typewriter and they write a book. So this idea of reading about the craft of writing is really new to me. Like, shouldn't I be able to just sit down and write the great American novel or the next great American novel? So Sarah, you have been a wonderful writing mentor to me, not Siri. Siri thought I was calling her. Go to sleep, Siri.
Happens to me more than you would think.
But tell us why it's important to keep learning about hold on a second. Siri, stop. Go to sleep, Siri. Okay, she did. All right. So she was asking if she needed to call 911. So we're good. I don't know.
Wow.
So anyway, you are a very wonderful writing mentor to me. You have encouraged me so much. And I want you to tell us why it's important to keep learning about the craft of writing and what are some things we can do to grow our knowledge in this area.
It's interesting that you mentioned sitting at the typewriter and just writing. I think I was going to quote Ernest Hemingway as we move forward, but I think one of the things that he said was there's nothing to writing. You just sit at the typewriter and bleed. But another thing, another quote that I love that I think was Ernest Hemingway as well. And it goes, we are all students of a craft in which no one will be a master. And I love that approach, that teachable heart about the craft of writing. It's like how medicine's a practice. I know that feels weird to think about that, but they're constantly learning and about different things, diseases, the body, things they didn't know before. And so the craft of writing is like that too. When we look to the act of writing as a craft that we can hone and study, and that it's a journey, and that journey enhances our writing in each season, and it can color our stories as we're learning different things in its time, right?
Right.
There is no way I would be where I am as a writer without the many things I've learned from reading craft of writing books, pairing that with, of course, writers' conferences and online classes has really given me a good foundation. Not only to write my stories, which has been huge, but also to share that knowledge with others and share what I'm learning from other writers, other mentors, and even things that I'm learning about myself and writing along the way.
Oh, that's wonderful. And I think it's important as important as it is wonderful that you like to teach others and share what you learn. Because I think that when we do that, when we share what we've learned with others, it's solidifying it more for us and making us a better writer. And it's part of being a community. We think of writing as solitary, but it's a writing community. There are people, there are communities that you can join. There's groups that you can join. There's conferences you can go to. It's not something that I think you're meant to do all by yourself. I mean, the act of sitting down and writing the story, yes, that is solitary, but creating and honing our craft is something that we do in community, I think.
Absolutely. And I think it's something that I've seen that's a little different in the Christian writing community as opposed to the general market writing community. I think that the general market is becoming more this way, but in the Christian writing community, we're all on the same team. It's not like I'm in competition with other writers who write similar stuff to mine. We're not competing for readers. We are on a mission, right?
Yeah,
So God has
absolutely.
called us to write. And maybe that's what makes Christian writers a little bit different is we recognize that God has called us to write and has given us themes and stories and ways to communicate with fiction so that the reader can experience his grace, his peace and mercy and love along with the characters.
Yeah. And having characters that we can relate to, if you don't have a character that a reader can relate to, they're not going to read the book. And the first book that you gave me to read, and I'm going to hold it up, is on deep point of view. And the book is Writing Deep Point of View, Inviting Readers into the Story by Kathy Tyers. Did I say that right? Okay.
Yeah.
And it's helped me to really get into the mind of the character and also to let the reader see what's going on in the mind of the reader and seeing their pain points and seeing what they struggle with and how they have victory. And that has really helped me. So yeah. What are your favorites? And what are some of your favorite writers and authors?
Some of my favorite craft of writing books are by James Scott Bell and K.M. Weiland. I have a couple of the books here just so that you can see a couple of their covers. This is a book by James Scott Bell, and this is one by K.M. Weiland. But these are just one of several of books they have written for creatives. And I think these writing teachers have an amazing grasp, these two in particular, but there are others as well, have an amazing grasp of the craft and also the ability to break it down for fellow writers. I think that both elements are important when you're looking for a craft book. You need to find someone who has knowledge and the ability to teach. Because if someone is very knowledgeable but doesn't have that gift of teaching, it can lead to just flat information that is difficult to digest as you read. But if you're a skilled communicator without a solid foundation, then it's just rhetoric. It may sound good, but it doesn't have real substance or practicality to it. So those are two I recommend. I also pulled Diane Mills. Diane Mills writes in a very great way that the way she presents her stuff is very applicable. It's very easy to take that into your own writing. So in Diane Mills, I actually did her mentor program as well, which was phenomenal. And I've had the privilege of hearing James Scott Bell teach in person. And I hope to one day be able to sit under K.M. Weiland's teaching as well. But I follow her blog and I read a lot of her craft books as well.
Yeah, it's important to choose the voices that you listen to. I think about that because not just in writing, but we have so many voices speaking at us nowadays on the internet and through books and through podcasts. We have to be careful because you don't want to take advice from someone who's never written a novel. But the voices that you've mentioned are so wise. And I sat under Diane Mills in a conference in 2023, and like the information, they often say that when you go to a writing conference, it's like drinking from a water hose. And that was true. But the one thing that has stuck with me that I think is interesting is the importance of like color and what color can represent in a book.
Mm-hmm.
And so, she was an amazing person to learn from, for sure. Oh, and there goes Teddy. Oh my God.
Yeah. I do think, as you're talking about even just what color represents, when you decide what color to make a character's shirt or a house paint color, color can be important part of the setting, and it's just layers. There are layers to a story and layers to what the reader will perceive. So I think it's important to sit under the tutelage of writers that have been published, and that you respect.
Yeah.
Not that aspiring authors or newbie writers don't bring anything to the table. They certainly do. There's value in their journey, and there's value in what they're learning. But you can have a case of the blind leading the blind, right?
Absolutely.
There are so many things about writing that are intuitive, things that we pick up from reading other books and consuming story. And the fact is that we're built for story. We're created for story. Mm-hmm. But there are concepts that we as writers can better utilize when we realize what they are and how best to harness them. Absolutely. Understanding things about genre expectations. What do readers of clean romance expect in their books? What do they expect to not be in their books? Those kind of things help you as you put guardrails on your story. Not that you write in a formula, but it helps you. Like, for example, in clean romance, there's what we call closed door, where things that we should not experience outside the bedroom.
Right.
They are not on the page. The door is closed during those kind of things. So that's an expectation in the clean romance genre. So you need to be careful about not writing scenes that would violate that expectation. But when I first started, I read everything I could about plotting. I am a pantser by nature, and that comes from the phrase writing by the seat of your pants. That means that the writer generally writes without a plan or an outline and just go where the wind takes me. But at the core of my being, I'm a planner. I make a grocery list. I make a to-do list every day. I write down the things that I've done so that I can cross them out on my to-do list. So I wanted so desperately to marry those disparate feeling pieces of myself. And with teaching from an author named Sarra Cannon, she has a YouTube channel called Heart Breathings, where she offers a lot of good, solid teaching for writers. James Scott Bell, K.M. Weiland. There's an author, her name is Gwen Hayes, and she wrote a book about plotting romance specifically. But with those educated voices speaking into my writing, I have gotten to a really good place with that balance between planning and pantsing. What about you?
Well, I think I'm a pantser at heart. I want to just sit down and write. And I want to share an analogy, something that when you were talking, I just got this picture. So all these worksheets, you gave me tons of worksheets. You gave me so many tools to use to get started. And I'm like, I want to write. I don't want to spend all this time, deciding like what was my character's childhood like, or, where do I want this story to go? I just want to write. And it's like, you talked about layers and how there's what we're learning through reading craft books, we're adding layers to our book. And it made me think of a painter, especially someone who's an oil painter. They have to do one layer at a time, and then they have to be patient and step back and let that whatever layer they've worked on dry before they add on top of it. And I think that that is so true of what we as writers need to be. We need to layer. And so plotting, I, I'm not going to be a major plotter, but having a plotting time is laying down that first layer and then going back over it and adding the different, like what color hair or what color shirt she had on, or, all that stuff needs to be there. And plotting helps to get there. Now, my husband, I'm going to shout out to Sean. He just published his first novel. It's became live on Amazon on Sunday, I think it was.
Yay!
I know, hey. And he is a plotter. He had an Excel spreadsheet, and he had everything plotted out. And he had like what lines, like what the main characters, this was their storyline, and then how to weave the secondary character. But that's just that's how he has to be to write. But when I read his work, I felt like he really had a full story. I thought it. So it's encouraging me, all that to say, it's encouraging me to slow down and plot. And what I find that I like to do is I'll plot out 1 or 2 scenes at a time. And then I write those scenes. And sometimes where I thought I was going as I write those scenes changes. Sometimes it doesn't, I remember writing with you one day, and, we had excuse me, it was the book with Betsy in it. And Nick's mom, all of a sudden you were writing dialogue, and all of a sudden you said, I didn't know she was Russian, so having that flexibility. Yes, we have to have a plot. We have to know where we're going. We have to have a plan so we can layer, but then also letting the book dictate kind of where you go.
Yeah, they do say, writing coaches say this, and I fully believe that it is true. The more of a pantser you are, the more intense your rewrites and self-edits will be. And the more you plan and plot, the less you will need to self-edit or rewrite. And neither way is right or wrong. It's just where the bulk of your work is going to be. And so for newbie writers, I certainly recommend, unless you just have to get that plot out, just write the story. Feel your way through it. Feel your way through what kind of writer you are. You don't know until you do it. So I never want someone not being stymied. I don't ever want someone to be stymied by trying to figure out a plot, or if they need to plot even. But back to what you said about deep point of view, I had never heard that term before when I wrote my first 3 books. And so I again, once I started getting further into my writing journey, I started reading more about it. And some of the techniques I was already doing, because again, a lot of what you know about writing is intuitive from what you're reading and how you're receiving story. But not only writing Deep Point of View by Kathy Tyers, that book is phenomenal on this topic. But there's another book that is a really good, like, step-by-step kind of thought process. And it's called Rivet Your Readers with Deep Point of View by Jill Elizabeth Nelson. That's a good one to check out. But for sure, you need something like The Emotion Thesaurus. This is by Becca Puglisi and Angela Ackerman. You can get this, of course, on Kindle, or I like to have it as a reference. And this is a great way to help you understand how to show emotions and emotional responses in a realistic way. So that allows the reader, as you said before, to experience the emotion with the character instead of just being told what the character feels.
Right.
So what are you focusing on in your learning as a writer right now?
I'm focusing on developing strong characters. You and I are reading the book by James Scott Bell about writing good fiction, or writing good characters, because I want my characters to be something that can be characters that people relate to and can say, hey, I see myself in that. I'm also working through an online writing intensive, and I want my readers to have a Me Too moment where, like, oh, that's me. I see myself in that. Because my goal, like you said earlier, is I want to I want to weave my faith into my characters. So I show the characters how they work through their struggles with the Lord. And if a reader can say, hey, I struggle with that, and the Lord can help me through anxiety or body image problems. Yeah, so that's where I am. What are you working on?
Well, as you mentioned, we are reading through Writing Unforgettable Characters by James Scott Bell, and it's very intriguing. It is reinforcing some things that I've already read before, and it's got new information in there as well, which is always a good mix. But I agree. It's very important that the reader can connect with the character if you're going to stick with them for a multi-chapter adventure, right?
Yeah.
If you can't relate to the main character in some way or feel something in reaction to the main character, we, the reader, will get lost easily and basically stop caring about the book. So it's not that plot isn't important, and it's not that character is the be all and end all of a story, but if you don't have an interesting character that is relatable or makes you feel something, sympathy or whatever, you're just not going to be able to hang with that novel very long.
Exactly. Like I'm a Jane Austen fan. I love her books. And it makes me think of Mrs. Bennet. She doesn't really change through the book. You don't see her. She doesn't really have an arc, but I feel like she's kind of a humorous person because of just like how she lets her nerves, like, oh, my nerves, Mr. Bennett, my
heart has such flutterings.
Exactly. You don't know what my nerves suffer, So I just think that even characters like that can make us, we don't see her change, and maybe we can't relate to her, but she's like a comic foil. And I don't know if her goal is to get her daughters married and married well, which at that time in history was a major concern of mothers. But I don't relate to her, but I do find her funny, and I enjoyed reading her. She added to the story.
Yeah, she made you laugh. She made you feel something. And you're right. She is more of a static character, meaning that she doesn't change in the story, but you rely on her as the comedic relief. Every time you see her on the page, you're like, oh, this is going to get crazy right here.
Exactly.
But I also think about Mr. Collins and what an interesting static character he is. And we all have met or read or seen in movies characters that are like that. But the thing about it is you take a characteristic or a character type and then you tweak it a little bit. So Mr. Collins is, those of you that have read it or seen one of the productions of it, he's this sniveling sort of awkward character, but the way he interacts with Catherine de Bourgh makes it even more interesting. The way that her character affects his character and the way they interact with each other creates this whole different dynamic for him. And so I agree. The character needs to make us feel something. And we like to go on a journey of change with the main character, but characters that we remember aren't always the ones that were main characters, aren't always the ones that change throughout the story. Yeah. Although I don't think about Pride and Prejudice without thinking about Mr. Darcy. So I will just put that out there. I'm just saying that. Yeah. Just going to put it out there.
But the different types of characters in a book are more, again, that layering. It's that making the book alive. I feel like books are alive. I mean, I can read the same book over and over again, and I know that if I'm wanting a happy, feel-good book, I might pick up this one and reread it. If I need a book, if I'm in a mood where I really want to have a good cry, I'll read this book. So yeah, they're living. Books are living, and the more layers through the different writing techniques that we have, the better, the more we can connect to that book.
Yeah, and I totally agree. I think story is a living thing. I think that story, again, as I mentioned earlier, it's a part of who we are. Earliest traditions in our ancient cultures were passed down through story. Ancient peoples tried to explain the creation and the world and the things that they were seeing, the weather, through fables and stories and myths about how it came to be. Our ancestors told stories to pass down their history and to share warnings and joys and how to find the good water sources, right? And so in the wake of Easter, I think more about that as a writer. And as we've been celebrating Jesus' death and resurrection, and this reality that story is ingrained in us. And I believe that we receive and tell story the way we do because we are in the middle of the greatest story ever told. The spark that starts the story, or the problem that kicks us off, my writer friends, you would call it the inciting incident, would be when sin enters the world. And we follow this story of God's great love for us through his journey with Israel, with his people, to the birth of Christ, and then to his incarnate life on earth, teaching, and his death and resurrection. And then we are all being written or woven into this beautiful tapestry in which he continues to pursue 100%. The lost.
Absolutely. 100%. You know, I had not ever thought of the Bible as the story of Scripture. I've heard that a lot recently, that we need to look at the story of Scripture. What is Scripture trying to tell us? And when we think about going to the book of the Bible, going to the Bible and thinking of it as the story of Scripture, it becomes much more interesting to read, because you're like, oh, we see in the old, like a lot of times people are like, I don't read the Old Testament. It's hard to understand the Old Testament. But we see, when we know that God is telling a story through the whole thing, we're like, oh, so they rebelled and that hurt, God wanted to bring them back. And so he allowed this to happen. And he continually is calling them back to him. And it wasn't until Jesus' death and burial and resurrection and our faith in that we actually have the ability to have a relationship with God. So to look at Scripture as the story of God pursuing man, man's fall, and then God pursuing man to bring him back to what we had in the beginning. We're not there yet, but that won't happen until Jesus returns. But we are on that journey, and Scripture helps us to see that. And there are things in the Old Testament that you're like, why is there a talking donkey? Like, why, because there's Balak, and he's trying to beat his donkey so that he can go and the king has said, please come and curse the Israelites. And so he's going to do it because the king's going to pay him money, and he's beating his donkey, and his donkey finally says, why are you beating me? And so, just who would have thought that, a donkey would talk in Scripture? So yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And I think that there are so many times that we come to Scripture primarily to see ourselves there. And we can find a part of our story there because it is about God pursuing man, and Scripture is alive and living and active and beautiful that way, that we can see things that apply to our situation and that God speaks through Scripture into our lives today. But the primary purpose of Scripture that I think we lose sight of sometimes is to tell us about God.
Absolutely.
Who he is, what he's like, what Jesus's earthly life was like, and what his desire and hope for us is.
Yeah. And I think it's amazing how, as writers, he is sharing that with us, because we are able to write stories of redemption. We're able to show through story how God is still working today. He hasn't stopped working. And I think it's just such a privilege to be able to write and through fiction say, this is how this character worked out their situation with the Lord, how they learned about him, what they learned about him, and then share it with the world. It's humbling, and it's amazing that we get to be a part of that. So
absolutely. I think that nonfiction tells us about God through teaching, and fiction tells us about God through experience.
I love that. I love that. That's wise there, friend. You need to write that down.
Oh, I didn't come up with that. I read that somewhere. Don't be all
okay.
I think it's very true, and I think it's very, very appropriate for what we're talking about.
Absolutely. Well, I want to thank everyone for joining us today. And we love to get to spend time with you. We love talking about stuff. And then we want to hear from you. We would love for you guys to share with us, what are you reading? If you're a writer, what areas are you concentrating on in your craft? And for those of you who aren't writers, what are you reading and why do you love it? So we just thank you for joining us, and be sure to join us next week when we'll have a new topic that is important for us to discuss.
The importance of, you'll find out.
Exactly. Love you guys. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening. This episode is over, but your writing journey continues. Visit sarraturnquist.com to find links to help you achieve your writing dream.